This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, brought to you today by the Fitness Buff Show, the leanest, fastest hour on radio. Check it out online at fitnessbuffshow.com and start getting fitter and faster today. Besides a glass of Dr. Pepper, the one material thing I look forward to every day is making contact with my Macintosh computer. I've been one of those crazed Mac guys since actually about 1984-85 when I bought my first Apple. It was a 2C. Since then, I've upgraded every couple of years through the Plus, the Centris, the iMac, a Power Computing clone, an early iBook, a special edition silver clamshell iBook, a newer iBook, the desktop G5 I'm looking at now, and there are also two iPods in the house, one mini and one video. I'm the crazed Mac evangelist you PC holdouts hate so much. But wait, I've got a better one. Joining me today is a guy who is probably more Mac crazed, by profession at the very least, than I am. He's Jason Snell, editorial director of MacWorld, publisher of MacWorld magazine, MacWorld.com, Playlist, macOS 10 Hints, and MacUser.com. He's covered Apple and the Mac market since 1994. Jason, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thanks, Bob.
Now, I'm just going to point out to everybody who's seeing this that this is the first time Mr. Media has tried to do a video iChat, and we're just kind of going seat of the pants here, so hopefully it'll work for everybody. So we have the iPhone, iTV, iMac, iPod. Has there ever been a more exciting time to be a Mac person?
I don't know if there has. You mentioned in the intro that I've been doing this since 1994, and I've been a Mac user for a few years longer than that, although not too many more. And that means that I went through that period in 1997 when things looked bad. I mean, things were really bad for Apple back then. They were at the end of the rope. They were out of money. People were abandoning the platform. That was right when the clones were happening too, and that didn't work out the way that they had thought. Jobs came back, and it's really been all uphill since then. It's kind of amazing. And this latest run that they've been on, I mean, the iPod changed the game for Apple. It turned from a brand that was kind of this niche computer brand that people who weren't part of the club thought was this weird computer that was incompatible with all the other computers out there, and why would you want it? And it was this cult kind of thing. And the iPod just completely renovated Apple in the minds of the public because everybody loves the iPod. And it's had great spillover effect, I think, for the Mac. And it goes into these other products like the iPhone, where you see this incredible excitement over a brand new Apple product.
You know, I think this is what it's like being on the cutting edge. By the way, I mean it happens. It's all good. The iPhone. You know, the iPhone's interesting. I think it's really good. I think that it is revolutionary in many ways, and a lot of the people who don't get the iPhone, I think that's because they say, well, come on, there are other smartphones that do this feature and this feature and this feature. It's like, okay, first off, not very many smartphones have all these features. And second, it's the execution. I mean, it's the same reason why the iPod is better than the Zune. I mean, a lot of it has to do with execution. A lot of it has to do with the user interface. One of my guys who is really bright on this subject, Chris Breen, who writes for MacWorld, the way he put it was, I'm pretty sure some of these features were on my last phone, but I was too stupid to know how to use them, which I take umbrage at the idea that you're too stupid. I think the device is a failure if a relatively intelligent human being cannot figure out some basic features of the device. But the fact is that's what makes the iPhone pretty cool, is that Apple is really focused on exposing all these features in a way that isn't the same way that every other smartphone does, which is by adding a bunch of new buttons and a bunch of obscure things that you would never understand. That said, it's still a version 1 product. I mean, Apple seems to have taken the philosophy of omitting features if they weren't ready to go yet, which is weird, but when you realize that they'll be able to do iPhone software updates as we go along here, we'll probably be seeing a lot more features added to the product in the next few months. So, there are some weird gaps in its feature set right now, and I assume that's just because Apple needed to ship it, and they decided to omit those features rather than have them be there but bad or not work right, which is probably a good approach, because the end result is that the iPhone is really, what's on it is really solid. It's much more polished than I expected from a first version of a product. I keep gesturing over here. It's because I've got an iPhone over here, so that's why I'm doing that. So, let's see. Well, it's so the lock screen has got a picture of my kids, so that's pretty basic, and then there's the standard menu, and then I've got a bunch of stuff on here. I've got some audio, I've got some pictures, I've got video. I've actually got some of the fall pilots because I'm working on this project to talk about what the fall pilots are on the networks for just as a hobby on the side, not a MacWorld kind of thing. And yeah, it's been great. I have not been using any other iPod since I got it, and I've used it for email a little bit, which I had a Trio before, and I never used the email, or almost never, because it was just not because I couldn't do it, but because it was not pleasurable to try to do it. It was a pain to even get email out of it. And that goes to the heart of, I think, why the iPhone has appeal. It's not that these other devices can't do those things. It's that you don't want to do them because they're too hard, or you don't even know you can because they're too obscure. And the iPhone is about exposing all of those features in a way that a regular person can actually use it. I was on AT&T before. I understand some people have terrible experiences with it. It's okay. It works for me. I haven't had any drop calls. I get decent reception in my house. I used to not, but I in the last year or so, I've gotten better reception in my house. The Edge network, which is the digital network that Apple uses, and it's controversial because it's this 2G, second generation network. It's not the super fast third generation network that's out there now. And it's okay, but it varies pretty widely. If you're in certain areas, the edge speeds are really slow, and if there's a lot of traffic, they can get really slow. And at other times, it's really usable. So it's kind of a crapshoot. I've had both, and when Edge is good, it's fine, and when it's bad, it's bad. That's one of the reasons why it's funny with all the hype about the iPhone. One of the things that I tell people that they seem to have not known about the iPhone is that it does Wi-Fi, and that's the key. Is that if you're in a place with Wi-Fi, you don't use the Edge network. You use these super fast Wi-Fi networks, and once you've set up the password for that Wi-Fi network in a place you go, it just logs you in as soon as it gets there. So when I'm at work, I'm on the Wi-Fi. When I'm at home, I'm on the Wi-Fi, and that makes it a lot faster and a lot better experience too. Yeah, or just happen to be in a place where the Edge network is good, and it sounds like it's getting better, but it's never going to be faster than a certain ceiling, and for that, we're going to have to wait for an iPhone, a piece of hardware in the future from Apple that uses that third generation network. But they have lots of reasons to do that. I think the big reason that everybody's assuming why the iPhone doesn't do the 3G cell phone network is that it would have used up so much battery power that the thing wouldn't have any battery life at all, and so they opted to sort of use some tried and true technology instead, which is interesting from Apple. They usually like to push it, so they must have had some really good reasons not to be on the cutting edge with that one. I'm not. It has pretty good battery life. It doesn't have a removable battery, and that's been the big criticism because theoretically, if you're at the end of your battery life and you've got a spare battery, you can swap it in and keep going. Now, I've had cell phones I'm going to say I've had a relatively smartphone for 6 or 7 years now, and not once have I ever even thought that I should have had a second battery for it. So I don't get it, but I understand there are people who use their cell phone all the time, and they really abuse the battery, and they like having a second. We're going to see a bunch of battery backup products where there are little things like there are for the iPod. Actually, the ones that are out there for the iPod now will work with the iPhone, where you just put batteries in a little box that plugs to the bottom of the phone, and it recharges the phone, or it lets you operate the phone. So people will make some of that stuff for emergency conditions. And the other knock on it is that you can't take the battery out when it's at the end of its life and replace it. And that's true. It's also true for the iPod, and the reality is that the life of these products, by the time that battery is unusable for you, you probably will have long since wanted to go or have already gone to a new model. So, and also if it's anything like the iPod, by the time the iPhone battery in 3 or 4 years kind of wears out to the point where it doesn't hold a charge, there will probably be lots of places where you'll be able to take it or mail it and have them swap it, or have them mail you a kit and let you swap the battery yourself. I'm sure that's all going to happen. So I don't think it's that big a deal. If you're somebody who has to go for days at a time on one charge and relies on multiple external battery, or swappable batteries, then it's not for you. But I don't think that's a lot of people. Up to the later this year part, I think that makes sense. I don't think it's going to happen that quickly, but I do think the iPhone is going to be just like the iPod. You're going to get in a situation where over time the price is going to come down and the product line is going to spread out, and you're going to end up with a bunch of different iPhone models to choose from. And I would think, eventually when their exclusive deal with AT&T runs out, they might even offer different models on different carriers, but it's going to be a long time before that happens, I think. But sure, I think there'll be a smaller iPhone and a super full-featured big one and a super slim one eventually. But I think the iPod went through 3 generations before the Mini came out, and I think we'll probably see something like that with the iPhone. I could be totally wrong. I don't have any inside information, but that would be my guess. Is that it'll be a little while, but it will happen. Well, the Apple TV is funny. Steve Jobs referred to it as sort of Apple's hobby. It's not quite the fourth part of their product line: the Mac, the iPod, the iPhone, and then there's this hobby, and there's the Apple TV. It's a product that has a huge amount of potential, and it's just not there yet. And the question is going to be, does Apple want this product to be a success, or does Apple want to basically use this product to trap people inside the iTunes ecosystem? Because the Apple TV is this cool product. You attach it to your TV. I've got an HD TV kind of right over my shoulder. You hook it up to your HD TV. You put it on your network. It plays back videos from iTunes. It plays back all your music. As a video player, I love it. I love being able to watch videos that I've got in another room, stored on a hard drive, and I watch them on my HD TV. Looks great, sounds great. I never have to burn a DVD. I can just download them off of the internet, off of iTunes, or you can, not to give too much away here, but there are other videos out there on the internet that can be downloaded from other sources, and they'll play back on there too. The problem is, now it does YouTube, which is good, but there's this whole spectrum of web video out there. And for the Apple TV to succeed, Apple's got to embrace that. They've got to accept that, if ABC.com is streaming HD quality shows from ABC with commercials on their website, that Apple has 2 options there. They can say, no, the Apple TV is for people who want to pay $2 per episode to watch shows from ABC. The other approach Apple could take is say, okay, you know what? If you want to watch it with commercials for free, you can, and we'll hook it up. And if you don't, and you want to pay instead, you can do that too. Or, going out for streaming, like there are streaming services on the web, like Major League Baseball has live Major League Baseball games streamed on video. It's using Windows Media, but there's a Windows Media plugin for the Mac. I use it to watch those games. It works great. So they could support that if they wanted to. It would be outside the iTunes ecosystem. They need to come up with a way to have it all work, but they could do it. You go on, there are whole channels that are like that. The Al Jazeera English channel is like that. It's not available in the U.S. on almost any cable system, but you can pay $9 or something a month and get it. Why not do that through the Apple TV? But that requires Apple to say, our whole model here is not just about downloading things from iTunes and putting it on your iPod or your Apple TV. And I don't know whether they'll do that or not. I hope they do, because I think that it's a must for the product to succeed. The fact that YouTube is on the Apple TV now is great, but I think it is damning when you look at the fact that it wasn't there when it started. And it was the most obvious feature of that product, and it wasn't there when they came out with it. It just doesn't make any sense. They were so focused on the iTunes stuff that they just, YouTube, we'll deal with it later. It's like, how can you make a video product connected to the internet and not have YouTube on there? It doesn't make any sense. So I think they're their own worst enemy with the Apple TV, and if they want to open it up, then there's a lot of stuff that could happen with it. But if they lock it down, it's just going to be kind of like an iPod that's attached to your TV, and that's can be cool, and for some people it can be useful, but it's never going to be a huge success. If they open it up and apply their ease of use that they've got everywhere else to this, it could be
really cool. So, I hope they do that. Well, it's the latest version of macOS 10. They haven't done. It's going to be about 2 years since they released Tiger, which was the last one. It's got a collection of new features in it. Apple's trying to improve the productivity of users of macOS 10 with this release, I think. They changed the dock around. They changed the Finder and the desktop a little bit. It's mostly cosmetic. I think they're trying to make it a little more usable. The Finder actually looks a lot like iTunes now, which is kind of interesting. It's I don't know. It's an interesting idea. They're trying to be more unified in the way they approach their interface, which is good because they kind of in the last couple of years we've seen them doing a lot of experimentation, which means that different apps have looked different, and it looks like they finally sort of settled on the look that they want. So that should be easier for people just because intuitively, if every window looks the same, how do you? I think the most interesting feature that's in Leopard is Time Machine, though. Time Machine is Apple's attempt to make backup something that we all should do, and yet most of us don't do, at least with any regularity, make backup as easy as plugging in a drive. And in fact, that is quite literally what happens for the most basic use of Time Machine. You buy a big hard drive. They're going to sell a lot of hard drives. Buy a big hard drive and plug it in. And a little window pops open that says, would you like me to use this for backup? And you say yes. And that's it. You can configure it later if you want, but that's it, and it'll work. And it's pretty impressive, and you can roll back to old versions if you accidentally deleted something or changed something in a document. It's got this kind of wacky, spacey interface where you zoom back in time and pick out an old version and then bring it back into the present. But, it looks like it works, and we'll have to see with the final version. But I'm excited about that because I just think there's so much valuable data that we have, our personal stuff, photos, things like that. And who hasn't changed something in a document and then wished they hadn't pressed save, or deleted something and then wished that they hadn't deleted it? And with Time Machine, all of that is gone because it's there. And if your hard drive dies, you press a few buttons and it restores your data to a new drive. So that's the one that I'm probably the most excited about, that feature. Yeah, Safari 3 is coming. It's actually available now as a public beta for Mac and for Windows. And that's also the version that'll be there on Leopard, but you will be able to use it on the current version of macOS 10 as well, and there's a beta for that now. And that's, it's got some interesting new features. It's been updated to work with more websites. It's not a dramatic change for Safari, but there is some new stuff in there, and I'm using the beta, and it generally is pretty stable and works pretty well. Firefox keeps getting better, and it exposes one of the issues with Apple software development, which is Apple likes to do these big monolithic releases. And Apple is a relatively small company with a limited number of developers, and I think that plays into it too. Firefox has been this relentlessly improving product. The first version, it wasn't great. I tried it out. I didn't like it, but it keeps getting better, and there are plug-in opportunities it's got a built-in plug-in system, which Apple's Safari, there are sort of plug-ins, but you kind of got to hack it in order to do it. And you see that, though, with a lot of Apple's products. iLife is a good example where, the products are innovative, but the innovation that happens is in these monolithic releases every year or two, and then in between there's not a whole lot that happens with the product. You feel as if it's not even being worked on, and bugs don't get fixed, and it's problematic. iMovie is a great product. I recommend it to a lot of people, but the fact is it's had bugs in it for years now that never seem to get fixed. And I think there's some structural issues in Apple that have to do with the fact that they do have to do all this stuff themselves. They feel like Apple has to write iMovie, Apple has to write iPhoto, Apple has to do all this stuff. That's great, but they aren't that huge a company. And I think what ends up happening is you end up making these big splashes with these big product launches, and then they got to move on to the next thing, and the other products might not get the attention for a while. And then later, a year down the road, 2 years down the road, they get some attention again, they get some love, and then the circle has to move on to the next town. And it's an interesting challenge for them. I wish they were more open. I wish they had more open plug-in architectures for their products, and I wish that they had more ongoing kind of software update releases. But they don't, and it may just be because they can't, because they are trying to do everything
themselves, and that's why they're successful. Is they don't have 80 different vendors supplying the software that runs on their systems. It's from them. The core set of apps is from them, but they're also not a huge company when you compare it to something like Microsoft in terms of development, and they got to pick their spots. So it's the two-edged sword, I guess, of Apple. It can be challenging. I think it has a lot more to do with the fact that we're focused on them as our subject. I mean, essentially, we focus on Apple and its products. And so there is an issue where occasionally we'll get people kind of parachuting into our forums and places like that and saying, how can you write about this? You should be writing about all this other stuff. And, well, that's not in our beat. Our beat is basically what Apple does, and that's what we write about. That said, I think it's really easy to overstate the level of our relationship with Apple. I do get a lot of people who think I work for Apple, and I have to disabuse them of that pretty quickly. It's like, no. Not only do I not want to work for Apple, they don't want me to work for them, because it does Apple no good to have a non-independent voice. We might as well, that's Apple.com. They've got that. You want it to be an independent voice. But, you said things like rely on them for products. We rely on them for products in the sense that if they don't release products, we have nothing to cover. But that's about it. I mean, if they release a product, we go and buy it and then test it and review it, and then usually somebody uses it. The Mac I'm talking to you now, I mean, when those systems came out, we bought them all and we tested them, and then it kind of got rolled out to members of the staff eventually. But we do get some products from them on loan. They don't give them to us, but usually we end up going and buying them, because by the time we get the loaner, it's been 2 weeks, and we could have just gone down to the Apple store and picked it up on the day of. And so, the level of reliance on Apple, I mean, we could have no relationship with Apple at all, where they didn't even know it existed, and we could still do our jobs. It helps that they've got a PR department that answers our calls, and I talk to them on a regular basis, and they can get us access to technical people, and we can get things explained to us about why they did this a certain way. But that's a sort of a source relationship that lots of journalists have. The difference is just that they are the company in our market. Our market is 90% them and 10% all the other companies put together. And so if you compare us to something like PC World, I mean, yeah, it's trickier because there really is the big fish, and we deal with it. It's being independent. If we weren't independent, we would lose all credibility. There are people who will always say, MacWorld, all they do is say good things about Apple. Of course, I also hear from people who say, MacWorld, you should be more supportive of Apple and not write critical things of them. And, there are some fundamental assumptions in what we write generally, which is that, no, we don't write MacWorld from the perspective that you shouldn't be a Mac user and that the Macs are no good and why aren't you using Windows. There is the assumption there that you're somebody who cares about Apple products, and that by focusing on them, we get to know stuff that maybe somebody who parachutes in, covers Apple for a couple of days a month, and then goes on to the next gadget, the next PC, the next Windows program, the next virus, doesn't do. I mean, we spend all our time drilling down into Macs and Mac OS X and Mac software and peripherals and the iPhone and the iPod, and that's what we do. And so, there's a trade-off there, but we are proceeding from the assumption not that everything that Apple does is right, but that the people who are reading what we're doing are not questioning whether they should have a Mac. I mean, our audience are people who like Apple and their products generally, and want to know the specifics of what about this product? Is this product good for me or not? And so, it's interesting, but it's not that hard really to keep that relationship with Apple. We are at arm's distance. We're not next to their campus or anything like that. We talk a lot, but we are. It does. I hear from people who assume that Apple is like calling us up and telling us what to write, and it's just, it's just not true. I've never seen anything like that. I mean, there are also people who say that every review we do is paid for, and that's also not true. But people are going to believe what they want about the media, and they can go ahead and do it. But in reality, our relationship with Apple is good, but it's not. It's not like a super kind of tight relationship where we're relying on them in some way. Oh well, I let me check my watch. No, we get. I will occasionally, if we write something negative or critical, especially in a review or a first look of a brand new product, we will get we will get a call from Apple PR. Usually, we're already talking to them because we often will call them and say, look, we can't see how this is true. Do you have a comment? I mean, we do a lot of that. We don't try to play gotcha. We don't ask their permission to post stories, but at the same time, if we find something that's weird, we'll call them and say, this is what we're seeing. You have any explanation? And sometimes they have one, and sometimes they have none. And then we can say, Apple had no idea why we saw this or wouldn't speak about it. Or sometimes they'll say that they recognize that there's a flaw and they're going to correct it. But, it does happen where we write something that they disagree with, and, they give me a call or they call somebody on my staff and we talk about it. And every now and then in the past, they've called the president of the company, and usually what ends up happening is it's the same as any editorial organization. It's like, look, the editors are going to write what they're going to write, and that's the way it is. And generally I think Apple understands that. I mean, their companies understand that to greater and lesser degrees, that you can't, that if you lean on people who criticize you, that's not going to make them stop criticizing you. So yeah, I mean, I have a very open relationship with the people at Apple, and if we write something that they don't like, they don't have a problem telling me. But I think that they've got a pretty good understanding that we're going to write what we're going to write. And our big concern is when we write it that it's backed up and that it's factual and that we're not playing some sort of game where we make a big headline with something that's not really true and then have to come back later and backpedal. That we want to be we always want to do it right. So if there's something wrong, I mean, we've had it where systems have had tests that just didn't work. They're slower than the previous systems. And we've spent, sometimes a couple of days with technical people at Apple saying, why is this video test not fast? And that can be very illustrative because there might be some piece on the web that says, I ran this benchmark that I downloaded and it sucked and these systems suck. Whereas we can come out and say, well, it turns out there's a problem with certain apps with the video card, and until those apps are updated with new software, they're not going to work very well. So if you use those apps, don't buy the system yet. And that's much more informative than hey, I ran this test and got a bad number. So it goes back and forth like that. The suckiest Mac product, Apple product. I'm going to ask you to be a little more specific. Okay, we could do both. The suckiest Apple product ever might be the Pippin, which was this attempt by Apple to get into the game console market by sticking a Mac in a game console, figuring that you could just take Mac games, of which there really have never been that many, and stick them on a CD and put them in the Pippin, and it would be this game machine, which a Mac OS-based game machine seemed like a really terrible idea to begin with, and it was rightfully a flop, and that's I think, the suckiest product that Apple has released. Maybe the Apple III, but that's going back, I think, before my time. In terms of the suckiest Mac product that Apple has released, wow, I don't know. They haven't released a terrible product in a long time. I would have to go back to the 90s. I mean, maybe like there was the PowerBook whose batteries burst into flames. That was not a good product. I would actually label it as when they had the Performa series, and the Performa individual Performas were fine. But the whole idea of the Performa was there were these beige Macs without names. They were all like the 4321 and the 4323, and you couldn't tell them apart, and you couldn't tell what they did, and it was really emblematic of when Apple lost their way. And when Jobs came back, one of the first things he did is said, I'm going to just cut the product line. We're going to have like 2 products or 4 products eventually. He said desktop, laptop, pro, consumer, and that was a big deal because you couldn't even tell. It was just, well, this gray box was at Walmart and this gray box was at Sears, and they had different numbers, and that was a really terrible time for Apple. They haven't put out a really truly sucky product in a while. I'm trying to think. There's probably some app that's bundled with Mac OS X, and maybe I'm spacing on it now. That's not very good. There was, iMovie 2, iMovie 3, there was this point where iMovie was really good. I think iMovie 2, it was really good, really solid. And then somebody came to Apple or came into the iMovie group and said, rewrite this all in Cocoa, Mac OS X. And what happened was you had this product that was incredibly functional in version 2. I think it was version 2. And then version 3 came out, and it took a step back. It was like slow and crashed, and the plugins didn't work anymore, and And everybody said, why did this happen that you went backward? And we never got a sufficient answer. I think the answer was because somebody internal at Apple made a political decision, and they ended up with an update that was a downgrade, and that was kind of a disaster. So, and then I'll give you one more, which is .Mac. I think .Mac has. I'm trying to exert my independence here. I think .Mac has never lived up to it. Apple introduced .Mac, which is their web services stuff. And they said what they did, they introduced it by taking away a bunch of things that they said were free and replacing with something you pay $100 a month for, which didn't really instill people with a lot of excitement. And quite frankly, it's never really lived up to it. It's got some good things about it, but you see so many innovative things on the web that are happening, and none of them are happening at .Mac. It seems to be slow, behind the curve. In fact, I think the only reason that most people are paying for .Mac right now is out of inertia, or because Apple has done this, frankly, very Microsoftian thing of bundling sync features into Mac OS X that only work with .Mac, or that only work well with .Mac. And that's really lame to say we have this service that isn't very good, but it's the only one you can use because we control the OS and we control the service. I think it's got huge potential, but there are all these rumors about Apple and Google working well together, and part of me says Apple should just get out of the .Mac business entirely and work with Google on some kind of premium set of features with Google, because why would I ever use .Mac Mail or Gmail? Gmail is so much better than .Mac's Mail, and it's free. And .Mac I'm paying $100 a year, so I think that would be. I'm working my way up to .Mac. I think maybe .Mac is the suckiest thing that Apple's done in a while, because it just have never come through. I think some people pay for it because they want their Mac.com iChat address, which you don't have to pay for. You can get that even without paying. And so there's some ignorance and there's inertia where it auto-renews, and then there's like one feature that syncs one place that you want to have, and it's just not enough. It's not worth $100 a year for sure. So let's hope they address it or kill it or something, because it's just not. There's just nothing there. I'm no stranger to technical problems. Trust me.